right, we are going to talk, of course, about the topic that is really burning up the internet and the media right now, and that is the big school shooting over in Uvalde, Texas. And it is the second major shooting in the past 2 weeks involving a crazed gunman. In this case, it was in a town closer to the southern border. The last one was in Buffalo, obviously at the other end of the country. And the targets were completely different, right? So the one that happened in Buffalo at the Top supermarket, majority of the victims were blacks. And the one in Texas was apparently mostly, if not all, Hispanic victims. And the perpetrator in Buffalo was a white man with a clear racial motive, whereas the one in Texas was a Hispanic person, and the motive is a little hazy right now. Now, we're going to sort of pick apart some of the major reactions to it. Now, I'm on my phone right now. I'm not in front of a computer, so this isn't going to be by any means comprehensive. And I'm sorry if I fudge a couple details. If you want, you can correct me in the comments, and I'd be glad to reply. But first of all, there are a lot of reactions that are sort of wheeled out pro forma every time that there is a major shooting like this in the United States. One of the problems, of course, is that as one of the few countries that in our Constitution enshrines the right for civilians to own and keep firearms, a lot of critics of that policy will point to the fact that no major Western nation has any sort of comparable situation, and therefore, why is it that they don't have school shootings? Why don't they have? Now, these arguments, I think, are fallacious. Yes, there is less availability of firearms, such as, and especially long guns in nations in Europe and especially Japan. By the way, Japan has been successful to a large degree in keeping gun control successful. There are other problems in Japanese society, but Japanese gun control has been a success as far as I can tell. One of the reasons for that might be the fact that Japan is an island nation, so they don't have a porous border over which people can simply walk on in and nobody does anything about it. So yes, there are countries that have implemented gun control, and those countries are, of course, they're not necessarily a lesson in what's going wrong, but they're also a lesson in why the United States is different for very simple reasons. Okay, Japan and the United States can't implement the same policies on everything because you're not comparing apples to apples. There's no, so when with regards to shootings abroad, they do happen, and these are things that do happen, or they are at a much lower level than the United States in terms of school shootings. So we have school shootings here, and there have been shootings in Europe. For example, in France, there were a number of shootings. The best example is the Bataclan. So you had terrorist attacks. How did, that's the real question here. How did those people get their hands on, in some cases, actual military grade weapons, not like the so-called weapons of war that we're about to talk about? That's a real question that nobody really wants to answer, because there is gun control in France. There is gun control in Belgium. Some of these nations that have been plagued by, intermittent terror attacks by Al-Qaeda and ISIS and things like that. And people will respond and they'll say, well, these are networks and they have ways of evading law enforcement. Well, other people besides terror networks can figure out how to evade law enforcement. Organized crime, and in some cases very low level organized crime, will never go away. So that is an element of gun control that they'll never tell you about, that you can make some of the best legally comprehensive legislation out there and put even good enforcement mechanisms in place, but you can't totally enforce a ban on anything. And that brings me to my next point. A lot of these people will talk about how, all we need is to actually give the tools to our law enforcement in order to actually tackle the issue. What's actually true is that we have other laws that are on the books that we give tremendous resources to law enforcement to enforce. The best case to compare this to is the war on drugs. You have all these controlled substances, whether it's marijuana, whether it's cocaine, methamphetamine, and they're all prohibited under FDA drug schedules for commercial distribution. And they still get sold, and people can even manufacture them underground or smuggle them into the United States. So the notion that making a new law, that even if it were to be constitutional, which it won't be, but let's say you were to pass new laws like a new assault weapons ban, that does not end the flow of these weapons into the United States. In fact, it will probably create a much more potent and aggressive underground arms market. There will always be people, both people who have criminal intent and people who are not criminals, but they are enthusiasts that will buy these. There's there's all these laws about what vehicles are street legal, right? And they're still street racing. So these things happen, and it's in fact street racing. From what I understand, it's gotten worse in California. I think in Oakland it's become almost intolerable. I forget what they're called, but they have these events where basically these street rod owners will take over an entire intersection and behave as if they are in control and go on parade. It has like a very basic name. I forget what it is. I shared an article about it with a friend of mine a couple weeks ago. So the notion that, we'll pass a law and that law will basically allow us to really get a handle on this outbreak of violence, gun violence, they always call it. They always call it gun violence. They never call it murder violence because they want to define it by the weapon being used. There are issues, I think, where there are specific weapons that I think do pose a danger because they're unsafe even for the user, right? So there's a lot of talk lately about, and I've done a video about this, about the Glock switch, which is it's actually called the auto sear. Those are the technical name for them, and it's this small device that you can put on a 9mm pistol, usually a Glock. I think most of them are made for the Glock 17, and it turns it into a fully automatic pistol, which is extremely dangerous because it's harder to control a handgun. The weight just isn't enough to distribute the force of the explosion, right? When you fire a weapon, there's an explosion in the chamber and the barrel is basically like a pressure release channel, and that's where the bullet goes. Because if you know anything about physics, air will go from a high pressure area to a low pressure area, and so will any other gas. And that's really the issue here, that we have a lot of people who are buying these weapons and they're not exactly firearms conscious. We had a shooting here in my neck of the woods at a plaza that I used to drive by every single day on the way to work. and 5 people they weren't killed, they were wounded, right? But the person wasn't trying to wound them. It didn't make the news because, first of all, it's in an area that's a blighted inner city, business district, and they also didn't die, but they very well could have, and nobody knows who did it, and it's very likely we might not know for a while who shot 5 people at this plaza. Meanwhile, these school shootings, and they're horrific shootings, or the first one was not a school shooting, was simply a mass shooting. They're horrific shootings, but the people who perpetrated them, their names are widely known. The first shooting in Buffalo, they talked ad nauseum about the shooter and his motive, which was a real racial motive. It was definitely a white supremacist motive. They talked about him for days and about how this is Tucker Carlson's fault, even though the guy was constantly dumping on Fox News and talking about how it's evil and that it's controlled by the Jews and whatever. But they still wanted to blame Tucker Carlson. So, people on the liberal side of the aisle, people who are in the media, people or not just liberals, but people who are on the broader left, they don't know how to actually take the real details of anything that happens and glean from them anything closely resembling the truth. So that's what they've been doing since last week. But now, because this latest shooting was perpetrated by a young Hispanic male, they can't use the same narrative, because why would this person, a Hispanic male, be channeling Tucker Carlson? So what do they make it about? They make it about the availability of guns, right? So immediately a narrative shift, and many people have noticed this. Unfortunately, some people will never acknowledge it, because this is, as with everything, a polarizing ideological debate. So the other argument that I hear a lot, and we're going to get to a couple of the crazy reactions that have come out, but the weapons of war argument, and this is something that is almost required when a politician on the Democratic side reacts to a mass shooting. If the shooting is carried out with what's called an AR-15 assault rifle, or any other assault rifle for that matter, any long gun, because the assault rifle is a sort of a arbitrary definition. So a long gun, that would be, for example, a carbine. It could be a longer rifle, such as the original, I forget what it is in civilian, but the original AR-15, which was more like the M16, as opposed to some of the more recent ones, which are like the M4 carbine. Anytime that these things happen, as has happened in the last 2 shootings, they talk about how we need to get weapons of war off the street. And what is absurd about this argument, and forgive me if you don't have a lot of firearms experience, is that the AR-15 is not a weapon of war. It's never been used in war. It is a civilian adaptation of rifles that were designed for military use, but it's a civilian adaptation. They only have one mode of fire. They have semi-auto, right? A military grade rifle would have select fire. They would also have the ability to shoot on full auto. This is something that people are often saying, well, it doesn't really matter, and these are minor details. They are not minor details. And I'll tell you what's also not a minor detail. If you want to talk about what a weapon of war is, there are many weapons that are out there that are available for civilian use that are nothing like the AR-15, and nobody knows about them. Why? Because they just happen to be not as popular in terms of commercial purchases or the use in sporting situations. Two quick examples. So this is a handgun. So it is fairly popular. It's not unusual to see people buy this. The Colt 1911 45 ACP. That is a weapon of war technically. That was the standard U.S. Army officer-issued sidearm for many decades. I believe the Beretta M9, another handgun, replaced it. That's an Italian pistol that's also a fairly good one. Both of those are they not weapons of war? The military was the ones that used it. They've actually, and by the way, so unlike with the AR-15, it is literally the same design, often the same mechanism, simply put, it's the same mechanism, okay? The same exact handgun, functionally, that was available to the military in the Colt 1911 is available to civilians. The same Beretta M9 is available to civilians. There is no change. Is it a weapon of war or is it not? Other good examples. You have the M1 Garand rifle. Okay, that is a weapon of war. That was the main weapon of the U.S. Army and Marines in World War II. It is a very distinguished weapon with generally favorable favorable views by people who are firearms enthusiasts, because it's very reliable and it is very accurate, and there are still people who own them and carry. I don't think they carry them, obviously, but I think that they would generally consider it, their home defense weapon. There are better weapons for that are more modern, but there are a lot of people who own these rifles, and the M1 carbine, which is a slightly more updated version that has a detachable magazine. So those rifles, both of them are weapons of war. Why is it that nobody talks about them being banned? Actually, I think you could probably see with ease that people would decide, because the M1 carbine has a detachable magazine, that it should be banned, whereas the M1 Garand, which does not have one, it has a stripper clip feed into a internal magazine. I could see people make the absurd argument that the M1 Garand is not a weapon of war and the M1 carbine is, simply because of the way they look. Okay, but I don't want to straw man anyone. I could just see it happening, because a lot of this is just a visual reaction. You see something that looks like what is assumed to be an assault rifle because of what's seen in movies like, Last Action Hero or something, and they say, oh, that is an assault rifle, right? You have the the Mosin Nagant rifle. That's a Russian military rifle from World War I, which people still use today, believe it or not. And why do they use it? Because it's reliable and because it is very accurate. So there are a lot of weapons that are maybe obsolete compared to more modern ones of today, but they are weapons of war. They were used in many wars over the past century or so. The Mosin Nagant rifle, I think, is nearing its 150th anniversary in being involved in wars. There are still indications that there are items of the Mosin Nagant being used today in the Russia-Ukraine war. So spare me this whole narrative that the AR-15, which has never been used in an actual wartime situation, is a weapon of war. Okay? And by the way, I don't own one, so this isn't me using my, just having my own personal bias because I don't want to give up mine. I'm just saying that if you want to make an argument about which firearms are more dangerous and which ones are weapons of war and which ones present a real risk to the safety of all Americans, you at least need to back it up with a little bit of technical understanding of the situation. If the AR-15 was banned, first of all, there would be a lot of them already on the street, so simply passing the law does nothing. Remember, passing a law does nothing. Enforcing the law is really where it matters, and enforcing this law would be extremely difficult. First of all, the idea that you could just pass a law and then people would hand in their rifles is it's just not going to happen. This isn't the type of country that would do that. People have learned from what happened in Australia. They've learned from what happened in other countries that they've enacted gun control legislation. There have been statistics that have shown that Australia actually has more guns available on the streets today than back in, I think, what was it, 1998, when they banned private firearm ownership. So spare me, please, this whole argument that, we have to start with something. And in any case, a lot of these weapons legally would be grandfathered in, and there is an enormous volume of these that are already out on the streets. Gun buyback programs have generally been a failure. Often criminals will turn in weapons that are either older and in poor shape and badly maintained in order to get new ones that are better. And, so it's the whole enterprise defeats the purpose. If you want to tackle gun crime, you have to put a lot of these people behind bars, people who are repeat offenders in violent crimes. Obviously, that's not the situation with the school shooting and the shooting at the Tops. Those are people who, they did have warning signs, but they were not people who were repeat gun crime offenders or repeat, they didn't have criminal records that were extensive, but they did have major behavioral issues in schools that were warning about, this guy is a problem. And the idea that, all you have to do is to ban the private sale of firearms, it's just not going to work. So, moving on to some of the crazy reactions. One reaction apparently was from Matthew Dowd, an MSNBC guy, and he claimed that 50% of gun sales in Texas have no background check. Now, the PolitiFact actually came out and they said there is no statistic to back this up. And I would suggest that this is probably a much, much lower figure than 50%. The place where people normally would buy guns, where there is no background check whatsoever, would be at a gun show. But it's not just anybody at a gun show. It has to be a person that has no federal firearms license and is just an individual who does a low volume of sales per year. I've sold a weapon this way. I've bought a weapon this way. They don't generally expect to sell a lot of guns at these shows, and often they're just going there in order to sort of make investments and cash in on their investment. So this is something that I think is an erroneous argument. By the way, a lot of the weapons that are sold at these gun shows are, they're of the older models. They're not necessarily, like the AR-15 definitely you can find there, but there are many weapons there that are collector's items. So I think it's extremely irresponsible for him to put forward that statistic in order to amplify this hysteria concerning gun ownership in the United States. The other crazy reactions, the Biden speech was a disaster, going and talking about how deer don't have Kevlar vests. Why do you need this in order to... Look, the idea that we own weapons because we want to hunt is ridiculous. It doesn't say that in the Constitution. It says nothing about hunting, nothing. It said a well-regulated militia, and look, I don't have the quote in front of me, but there's nothing about hunting in there, and the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the idea that you're going to swing any minds by saying that deer don't wear Kevlar vests is absurd, and it's an argument that he's rehashed time over time after time because he doesn't care really about the issue. It's about the rhetoric. It's about trying to score points with his own loyal core of followers. But in reality, most people who own firearms don't really go hunting. I personally, for religious reasons, I can't go hunting. Okay, we don't eat meat that isn't slaughtered. So these are issues that are, they're entirely born out of a fantasy within the minds of a lot of these politicians who think that because a lot of the gun owners that were around when they were younger were the type who would go out and, hunt whatever it was, like grouse or something, or duck hunting. They think that that's the standard gun owner in America, and that's the legitimate type in their mind, and the other people are just, they're just fanatics. That's not the way it really works. The other reactions, Obama had a crazy reaction regarding, tying the whole thing to the anniversary of the death of George Floyd 2 years ago. Has to be one of the most tasteless things that he's ever tweeted or said or anything. Look, the George Floyd incident and what happened in Uvalde literally could not pick two events that are less similar. And so what's the message here? So a police officer who kneeled on the neck of a drug hysteric suspect, and that led to his death. So that is akin to an 18-year-old kid who shot up a school. Where's the analogy? There's no connection. There is no connection. So Jason Whitlock actually brought that up, and I think it's appropriate that you have people who they simply express things out of the heat of the moment. They don't know how to filter out what they're going to say, whether it's appropriate to the situation, whether it's actually going to help. I think there were cases where Donald Trump did this, certainly, and then, but the problem is a lot of morons think that you only have to enforce that issue on one side. You only have to go after people like Donald Trump who have a tendency to shoot from the hip, if you excuse the pun, on certain issues rhetorically. They think it's a one-way street, but they can say whatever they want because all they're doing is they're increasing awareness. That's usually what they'll say. We're increasing awareness. We're speaking truth to power. You, on the other hand, you're using hateful rhetoric and you're stigmatizing people, and that's the way it works. Anything that they say is good, and anything that you say is bad because of the intent. And that's literally the standard that they use. That there's one group of people that has freedom of speech and another that does not, simply because of the viewpoints that they hold. And yet, President Obama can hold the viewpoint that the Uvalde school shooting and the anniversary of George Floyd's killing, that they're comparable, but I think any basic reading of the situation, it's hard to actually explain why, and that's something that I think we've seen increasingly in the past few years. You have these people who will spout off about a situation because they're feeling emotional about it, but it doesn't actually help in any way, and in reality it just calls attention to themselves, which brings us to, of course, the reaction that shook the world, which was Beto O'Rourke. Him going to that press conference with Governor Abbott and interjecting while he was giving a status update. It wasn't as if Governor Abbott was on his soapbox and saying, oh, we have to do this, we have to try that, this is what we're going to do, I've allocated this money for X, and that's not what happened. Governor Abbott was giving an update about the situation and Beto O'Rourke, and in fact he was turning over the floor to another speaker, his lieutenant governor. And Beto O'Rourke simply walked down and he started pointing his finger at Governor Abbott and yelling at him that he's doing nothing and that this was predictable and everything. If it was so predictable, Beto, then how come you did not do anything to stop it? If it was so predictable, then what solution were you proposing to it? The solution that he was proposing when he ran for Senate, when he ran for president. Okay, so when he ran for Senate, Beto largely avoided saying what he really wanted to do. But when he ran for president, he said, hell yes, I'm going to take your AR-15. And then recently, when he started running for governor, he said that his mind had changed and he doesn't think that it's really feasible. Now, is he back on the we will take your AR-15? He never feels that he has to take a consistent position or really justify the position, because Beto O'Rourke is 50 or I don't know, I think he's like 49 years old, but he's a middle-aged child. He doesn't know that it's no longer 1992. The movie Slacker, that reality ends at a certain point. You don't get to just skateboard and listen to vinyl records forever. And he just never got the memo that when you run for public office, people expect you to take serious positions and explain them. And instead, he thinks that these theatrics are the ways to actually get into office and create change in the world. He used to do the same thing when he was running for president. What Beto O'Rourke would do is he would show up somewhere, stand up on a table. So he wouldn't talk to an audience at their level. He would stand up at a table in order to draw attention to himself. And people started to say, hey, why do you keep standing up on a table? Why can't you just talk like a normal person? Why do you have to always talk with your hands and make all these expressive movements? Or why is it that at certain points you break into Spanish? These are problems that I think we're going to see from politicians increasingly. I mean, we have been seeing it. We've been seeing a lot of these politicians. You know, there was a debate in 2020 when Beto and Cory Booker both attempted to pander in Spanish. So those moments of theatrics and pandering, especially in a situation like this, are disgraceful and they don't help. His idea that you can go to a press conference after a mass shooting and point fingers at the person giving the update, regardless of whether he shares any responsibility for this tragedy, which I don't think Abbott does, but let's say even if he did share any responsibility, and point fingers and say, you are doing nothing, and while the blood of the dead is not even dry, while these bodies are not even in the ground, it is totally disgraceful. And that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can find all of my links in the link below. It is my link tree, so all of the different social media are there. And have a great day. Bye-bye.